Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today's session is going to be um, basically about lobbying, which is lots of fun and probably really important as we approach the election. So I'm just going to share my screen so we can get started. One second.
Right, are you doing that with that? Are you bringing your phone or this?
I'm carrying on.
If everybody could
I've never refunded
mute,
so I'm going to send you another 20 now.
I'm just going to mute everybody. Great. Cool. I think that's everybody arrived. We're just in the process of checking that everybody is here. Great. So, welcome to Lobbying on a Shoestring. Today's going to be a super quick whiz through how to think about lobbying, kind of the approach to take. We're very lucky to have an amazing speaker from the Campaign Lab community here, who will also be giving his perspective. And then I'll also be here to talk to you a little bit about super practical tips and tools that you can use when you're thinking about lobbying. So that's going to be the contours of today. It's really, really great to see everybody. We are also recording this session for those of you that can't make it. So to kick off, just a quick hello. I'm Hannah, and I help run a community called Campaign Lab. And we are essentially a network of progressive data scientists, researchers, and activists who are working together to develop innovative election tools and improve the way we analyze and understand campaigning. That's a picture of our community. I can see some fellow faces on the call today, but it's like a big group of amazing people who are really committed to changing the world and changing how we campaign. So that's kind of where we come from. And the sort of things we do is we build tools. There's lots of cool tools that we built, including a WhatsApp link extractor, which sounds very fancy, but does something basic, which is takes the links out of your WhatsApp chats. Because I'm sure lots of you organize and do lots of stuff on WhatsApp. We also conduct research. We recently launched some interesting research around political TikTok videos, which you can read on our website. And then we also run experiments with candidates and other campaigning organizations to try and understand, okay, what works and what doesn't work. So we do all sorts of things. And in fact, towards the end of today, we will also be asking you guys to fill in a form and tell us ideas or things that you'd like to see from us, because it's really important that we're guided by the needs of campaigners. So yeah, today we've got Rahul, who's very kindly offered to kind of frame our session and kind of talk through what he knows after a very long career working in public affairs for businesses, NGOs, and public bodies, and also give some insights into what works and what doesn't work. And then you'll also be hearing from me on some super practical easy tips on how to think about lobbying and the kind of practical tactics and practical side of what happens in Parliament and what happens kind of in an MP's office, and then also some sense of how to use digital tools to do that well. And yeah, I worked in a constituency office first and then moved into a parliamentary office. And I'm used to working with backbenchers and frontbenchers, and I used to help run a network of MPs. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're doing. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to Rahul. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And hopefully you can share your screen.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to seeing your amazing speaker. Can't wait. It's going to be amazing. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. All right. Can you see the screen? Has it worked? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So hello all. My name is Rahul Serene. I have worked in public affairs for 20 years. That is getting to be a long time, in a range of settings in Westminster and Whitehall and Brussels. I've worked for a range of businesses like Govia Thameslink, for whom I work at the moment, charities like the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and public bodies like the Environment Agency. And firstly, I'm really, really pleased to join today's session because when I saw the event that Hannah and Dan were running, I wanted to volunteer to help out because I'm just really keen to pay back some of the great work that the Campaign Lab does already. So and that wider community that you're all part of. I've always had a really big interest in using digital technology, particularly where it makes our democracy more open and accessible to a wider group of people. I think it's great power. Of course, there are downsides too, but I think let's focus on the positives. Yeah, as Anna says, my section sort of sets the scene on government affairs more generally ahead of Hannah and Dan's tips, and outputs from the MP workflow study. Actually, I've noticed like 2 people there, one from Civitas, one from Kite Trust. So some of this might be stuff you already know, but just hopefully giving overall sense of, I guess, public affairs in the round. I guess the first thing is what public affairs, what lobbying isn't. And it isn't just a succession of coffees. It isn't hanging out in number 10 every day of the week. It isn't kind of slightly dodgy discussions between MPs and businesses.
Oh, come on.
Thank you for positivity. What it is, and the CIPR definition is lobbying is a discipline within public relations where the general intention of the activity is to inform and influence policy and law. Lobbyists in general, so it might be public affairs or government relations, are practitioners who execute planned and sustained efforts to deliver specific objectives within this broad profile of activity. There are kind of 2 big professional bodies that are involved, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and the PR Consultants Association. They also have guidance on lobbying and importantly, codes of conduct for how it should be done. Finally, it also just points to some of the regulations on this. So there is a UK register of consultant lobbyists, but I think of more relevance for those working in Scotland is the Scottish Lobbying Register. So I just wanted to highlight those things, just to give people a bit of a sense of that process and sort of guardrails around government affairs. So the first thing, and this will be, I guess, very close, a lot of people's work already is around kind of the planning side of government affairs. What's the problem? What's a problem statement? And one of the things you can use is that 5 whys process to kind of whittle down from maybe a less precise problem statement to a much narrower one that is as specific as possible, kind of all that typical thing of who, what, why, when, where, and how. And simply, often it'll be pointing to something that is bad. It might be pointing to something we need more of, or processes that can change, that can improve the way that government and society move things forward. Another test I think is important just to look at is whether politics, government are a necessary condition for solving the challenge you face. It's worth asking yourself whether you as a sector, as an organization, as a community have done everything that you reasonably can do to address the problem independently. And I guess the reason I suggest this is that politics and government do tend to handle things that have not been fixed elsewhere. They're generally kind of devil and deep blue sea type problems, or rock and a hard place problems. Not always, but generally. There are some downsides in terms of politics, in that it takes time because you're working with a much bigger group of people. People take time, and government processes are often less dynamic than those within a civic organization or a campaign group. And you also maybe lose a bit of control. An issue shared isn't necessarily a problem always halved, but another kind of just risk is around the issue may attract new opposition just by its association into politics. Politics isn't the impartial weighing of facts. It's frequently not fair. It's as messy and unpredictable as people. So there are things I guess you need to consider. However, having said those caveats, the potential of politics is also far, far greater. And that's what's most exciting, is you can have a much bigger impact on the community and some solutions than working alone. So the first thing, taken the decision you're going to go down this route is being really clear on what it is you want to achieve. Kind of the classic thing you'd use for often personal, but it works for organizational objectives too, is using that kind of SMART framework. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable and relevant to your overall goal? Is it time bound? Well, you can use other models, but that just gives you an idea just to really be clear on your objective. Get as close to this as possible. You'll probably find that you want to check it with other people, just to kind of continue refining, just like you have with the problem statement. One thing I'd also just consider is what compromises you're willing to make. There is usually a kind of a spectrum between kind of the purity of the solution you're looking for and progress, because by definition you're opening up your problem and your objective to a much wider group. So therefore, you need to move with other people. And purity and clarity are great. They're kind of powerful motivators and they're unifying forces. They're particularly important to the most passionate supporters of a campaign. However, to achieve change does usually need some compromise to work, to overcome some inertia or resistance, or to get to the scale of support that you need. You have to kind of have a slightly bigger tent. You see this, of course, with political parties as much as with individual campaigns. So then there's the question of how will you do it? i.e., what's your strategy? I'm not going to go into the depths of strategy, but I just wanted to draw out a couple of things that are useful, like your sort of SWOT process. Where's your campaign strengths and weaknesses? What are the opportunities and threats in the outside environment? For instance, we know from working with MPs, there are many more good causes than there is time. So how strong and distinctive is your campaign's offer? For many of you, you'll be tapping into something hopefully a large audience already deeply cares about, which is obviously a great strength. It might also be your research-based insights or the experience of the community around the campaign that can change the grounds of debates or can renew or strengthen people's affinity to a cause, raising it up the agenda. There should be something that politicians can use so they can be persuasive themselves with their own colleagues and partners in government and parliament, or an electorate. It could be through like an endorsement or something they can use. Just thinking about opportunities and threats as well. Are there natural allies or competitors out there? How distinct are you? How could your offer be strengthened? Because the better you work with other groups, often the stronger is your coalition and the stronger is your offer to the people you're looking to work with. The second element I would just quickly highlight on strategy is around sort of stakeholder mapping. Who are the people or groups that you need to work with to achieve your strategy? Like, who has the influence or power to help solve the objective you set? Who is interested, either supportive or antagonistic, to your campaign? With whom do you already have a good relationship? No, build from what you have. Don't always necessarily start from start in the stars. These tools are essentially helping you prioritize, to help you try and grab the attention of a decision maker, or to make kind of that group of passionate supporters who maybe don't have the influence they need have a greater voice, and be more coherent to obviously then influence a decision. And then finally, just alongside your SMART objective, it is worth just thinking about, are there any kind of qualitative or quantitative key results that you're looking for that can tell you you're on the right path? Because while the SMART objectives gives you a great point to judge at the end, whether you've succeeded or not, kind of like key results as you go through can help you make those course corrections to improve the impact of your campaign. Maybe just to emphasize this, you won't convince anyone with your internal planning. You've got to get out there, and as you do that, you'll kind of quickly, I guess, get a sense of what approaches, what evidence, which partners are most effective. Politicians have three basic roles: representing directly or indirectly their electorates to inform decisions, helping the electorate through things like surgeries, and helping, in sort of quotation marks, translate government or the political scene for us, the electorate or constituents. Often people are seeking politicians to just change the debate in the politics, or in government, or in a wider segment of a population, sort of using them as an influencer, essentially. Though of course they're not always the most trusted partners, but they do have an important status among many. Secondly, I think more typically, and this goes back to the CRPR definition, we usually think of seeking politician support to influence a decision more directly. And in that case, I think it is worth considering where that decision is taken, because is it taken at kind of the local level, a more combined authority level, a devolved body, or something like the UK Parliament. Like any approach you take is likely to be multi-pronged, whether it be through different levels or tiers of government, or who you're speaking to within government and Parliament. So just focusing on decision makers, like ministers in the UK government, or Scottish executive, or portfolio holders in a council, it would seem like the most direct and simplest way to influence decision. But of course, as you will anticipate, they are probably the most time pressed. They have to work with others to get the decisions over the line, be it their kind of own officials or other arms of government, such as could be, the lead executive could be number 10, or it could be the First Minister or the Treasury and the finance side. And then fundamentally, their role is very precarious. They have limited time. They have to prioritize like everyone else. So that's worth there are kind of limits, I suppose, to what you can do immediately. The thing I'd point out, that's why the wider coalition that you build, the groundwork you build as a campaign, then give you greater credibility to go into those engagements with ministers and decision makers directly. At a UK level, the other political levers to influence change are, of course, like the opposition, the backbench MPs and peers, and of course, in many ways would normally go straight to kind of MPs, because their constituency link is generally quite helpful in terms of identifying your interests and the people involved in your campaign. But I do think it's also worth considering the role of peers, who are those who are most relevant to your goals, or who are those who are most active. They offer a big advantage, particularly the Lords is sometimes less political, has more opportunity to get into the detail of the law. In general, devolved institutions are often more innovative than the Houses of Parliament. They have systems of proportional representation. This is not unrelatedly, that also mean there's a greater prospect for consensual decision making, but that doesn't necessarily reduce the amount of work you have to put in to get it over line in that situation. Metro mayors and combined authorities are also well set up for action. There are other groups around MPs, and I know that Hannah's going to touch on these as well, like parties, think tanks, unions, and other informal networks that are relevant to kind of building that support for MPs buy-in. But I'm not going to focus on that today. So you've decided what you're doing and broadly who you're targeting. So digital technology has made these things, the research you need to do, much easier than ever. And I know the work of My Society, which is very close to Newspeak House, where lots of campaign lab work happens, is been very helpful through websites like They Work For You and Write To Them. They've made it much easier to find out what an MP has said, or to find out their wider interests, the groups they've signed up to. Have they declared any financial interests that are relevant to what you're looking to do? And obviously, kind of more simply, things like, if they have them still, personal websites or social media, are the things that they've said that you can reflect back to them in discussions. So then clearly you're looking to develop messaging, and things. Technology like AI does make, or ChatGPT makes it a lot easier than previously to develop those kind of first drafts that you kind of then check and refine and hone. And you have to be really clear, and this Hannah's going to talk about around what they can do, the MPs can do to help as well. One thing I would say is the Insights Discovery program, which I know that some people on the call will have had some dealings with. They describe different personality types, and while MPs, like peers and politicians, will have as varied personality as any other group, they're kind of the underlying environment they're working with is kind of very competitive and demanding. And these are people naturally put their hands up to volunteer for election and face that public scrutiny and to try and make things better. They want to get things done. They've made compromises. They want to improve things. So the general advice that I apply for this group is the Insights advice of be brief, be bright, and be gone. To an extent. Clearly, you need to do things like follow up on your own commitments to them as well. The one thing I just finished on is the major part of a politician's job is to persuade, convince, and corral. Are you giving them the tools they need to do your campaign? So that's the two things you follow up with them. One is what you've committed. The second thing, do they have what they need to take that next step? As I've just touched on the slide as well, it's not always going to work. Be ready to move on. So I guess fundamentally, the most important thing from this whole thing is you're looking to create or strengthen relationships. Some will be closer, some will be more transactional, some won't work out. Whether or not you are taking an approach of direct contact or encouraging people to write them letters, you are creating a relationship. So invest in those relationships. And those relationships might have started before you even spoke to them. They speak to people in their office. They speak to other colleagues in Parliament. So just be, you're always creating a relationship from before day one. And any relationship, of course, needs trust. You can only be responsible for your part of that bargain. Do what you say you will, as I said before, and assess whether this is actually going to be useful for your campaign. As we're talking about relationships here, I did want, as you can see on the slide, I wanted to just touch on Cialdini's principles of persuasions, because I think they're a useful framework, both for communications, but also just for relationships. I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't think I want to spend time doing that, but I'll draw out a few. So commitment and consistency is this idea that people want to appear consistent in their behaviors. So when you're doing your research, can you draw out the things they've already said that kind of suggest that they're going to be supportive of your proposal? Can you show them that other similar people are also supporting the campaign? Can you, through authority, you need to demonstrate, I guess, why they would value what you're saying. So is this going back to the point of this number of campaigners in your constituency, or the evidence you have, or whatever it is? These things aren't always establishing credibility is important to building trust, but it isn't always from Cialdini's perspective always logical, because he talks about kind of someone wears a white coat, they suddenly have a degree of authority they might not have otherwise. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And lastly, liking. It's a good start to a relationship in many ways if you're already familiar. Can you again draw out some of those helpful previous action and statements? So I've compressed a lot there in 20 minutes. I'll pass back onto Hannah, but happy to take any questions at the end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rahul. That was super useful and hopefully provides like a really good framework just to start out. And I particularly like the fact that the emphasis in all this is relationships. So I'm just going to move on to some like super practical kind of like tips, I guess, which is, I don't want to share. I want to present. Super practical tips which people can use, which is just like how to think very practically about what you can get out of MPs and what they can give you. and then also kind of some practical tips on how to build pressure, the kind of pressure that Rahul was talking about, and also how to build kind of relationships and the kind of tools that will help you do that. So first thing, I guess, is identifying MP targets. Again, Rahul talked a bit about doing your research. So there's some really useful kind of data sets that you can go and look at to find out who is interested or passionate about your issue. So you want to kind of build a network of MPs who are passionate about the thing that you want to be seen done. So the best thing is to actually go back and look at who has talked about this before. You might immediately want to think, oh, I'll go to the power of the decision maker, but actually if you've got a long-term campaign, actually having some passionate people who are properly like attached to the issue is maybe a really good first step. So they may be backbenchers, but you know, 6 really passionate backbenchers can be incredibly useful in terms of persuading a frontbencher. So going to people who actually care about what you're talking about is important. So you can easily search Hansard. Hansard is like the parliamentary kind of record of everything that's said, and you just need to get really good at using keywords. So just search for the terms that are related to your campaign, try and find people who've made interventions about that, and that kind of gives you that sense. The other thing is to maybe look at EDMs. These are called early day motions, and have a look at who might have signed an early day motion on your issue area or your topic area. That's also a really good way to find targets, and then also have a look at APPGs. So there might be an APPG on health or an APPG on, there's one on AI, I'm pretty sure. So if you're campaigning around those kind of issues, go and see who's on the APPG, because they are probably the people who have the most interest in this. A good thing to think about is backbenchers versus frontbenchers. So backbenchers, you might be more able to build like a longer term relationship with, that's kind of a bit deeper. They tend to be quite constituency or issue focused. Whereas frontbenchers will not have time to do much. Again, Rahul's advice about be gone is quite important when you're dealing with frontbenchers, just because they are going to be, really, really busy. And their main focuses will be on winning the election and generating press headlines, let's be honest. They will be the main things that they're focused on, and developing policy to an extent. And also you can leverage, once you have your backbench allies, you should use them to push for a meeting with the front bench. So building up that kind of grouping is useful, and then leveraging it to then get a commitment from the front bench. So what can they actually do for you MPs, which is a really important thing to think about, because often we think, oh, if we get the MP involved, it'll sort everything out. But it's really important to actually understand what they can do concretely. So they can do things like get an early day motion, which, you know, has no official power or status, but it's a record, a parliamentary record of these MPs supporting this issue. So if you kind of want an official record, or you want a way to understand, okay, what's your support like around an issue, you can do an EDM. It's kind of a way for MPs to express an opinion. You can look at the ways like previous EDMs have been phrased by using this link, but one thing to remember is that frontbenchers tend not to be allowed to sign these unless it's been signed off by the cabinet or the shadow cabinet. So be aware that the limit here is mainly crystallizing support among backbenchers. The other thing they can do is they can set up an APPG, which is an all-party parliamentary group. These tend to be really good for like shifting focus to a long-term issue. So if you've got a kind of a campaign or an issue that's going to keep being around, that you want to raise the salience of, setting up an APPG and being committed to like that for a long period is definitely worthwhile, because it kind of keeps it on the radar as an issue. And often it's a forum to bring other MPs into it. You can organise events, you can do things, it kind of puts it on Parliament's radar. So it's quite a good thing to do if you've got kind of a long-term interest. So for example, I think there's currently 2 APPGs on AI. One is on AI safety and one is on AI, and obviously have 2 different perspectives on that. Again, this is the form for doing that, and also organizations can act as a secretariat for that, which means you basically run the APPG alongside a chair, which is usually an MP. The other really concrete thing they can do is they can convene people and they can book rooms for you in Parliament. These are 2 really, really useful things if you're trying to either get press to cover something or launch a report. And also, like, the MP can be quite good at convening stakeholders. So if you want kind of a bit of like weight, sometimes getting an MP to do that is important. They can also do PMQs, which is, basically asking a question of the Prime Minister. There tends to be 15 people who get to do that. They don't have to declare in advance what topic they're picking. So what you can do is you can scan the order paper or future date orals and identify some MPs that will be allowed to ask a question and then say, hey, it would be really great if you asked a question on this issue. This is how it relates to your constituency. So usually people ask a question in PMQs that is related to like the news and is also related to their constituency. So if you are looking for an opportunity and you spot an MP that you have a relationship, you might say, hey, would you consider doing your PMQ on this? And that can be quite good if you've got an MP who maybe has been drawn quite a lot. They can also ask other questions. So oral questions, this is of any like department. People can ask questions of that department. So again, you can kind of like give them some briefing about how this question relates to their constituencies. MPs love a clip of them asking a question about their constituency on an issue that is important to their constituency. So if you can provide data or information as to why that is important to their constituency, they will then get a clip out of that when they ask a question about the issue to the Secretary of State who's responsible for that issue. Again, you can figure out who's been drawn for each of these questions, and you can also ask MPs to put in for these questions if you've got a particular area that you really want some questions to be asked on. And again, you can check who's been drawn. They can also do something called written questions, which is incredibly helpful if you're trying to find out information from the government. So you can kind of, if you want to have like campaign stats, or say you've noticed some gaps in government data that you really want to get to, you can ask a friendly MP to basically draft a question and they get an expedited reply. So it's kind of like an FOI, but stronger. And you can basically say, can you do a written question? And usually there's two types. There's ordinary questions, which they have to reply within 7 days, and then there's named day questions where they have to reply by a named day. And an MP can submit 5 of these every day. So actually, this is incredibly helpful. So you should definitely be leveraging the ability to ask questions, particularly if you want data. You can also get them to a private members bill, which is a very long-term option, not necessarily a great one, but if you've got a very specific law change where there's like it's largely uncontroversial and you've got a very enthusiastic MP who wants to make this like part of their legacy, this might be a good option to pursue. But generally you'd need a really committed MP because they basically have to build an audience for this. It's very risky. They have to put their name into a ballot, they have to be drawn, and then they get the chance to propose a private members bill, which is a bill that they are proposing independent of the government. And that's there have been some successes with this. There have been some private members bills that have passed. If you're interested, there's a link here and you can go through them. This is really good. Yeah, if you've got something super specific and will be popular. The other thing they can do is they can organize debates for you. So if you want to raise awareness of an issue, you can ask them to basically put in for backbench business debates or Westminster Hall debates, where again, this is done by ballot. And basically you might get a bunch of backbench MPs to put into ballot to have a debate on the issue that you care about. And again, this is kind of a motion is passed as an endorsement, but there's no sort of like legal concrete power. So this would literally just be awareness raising. So it's really important just to be aware that these are the kind of things they can do in Parliament for you. What can you do for them? So very concretely, when you're trying to influence MPs, you really need to think about what you're bringing to the table. As Rahul said, like you need to think about what their priorities are. So one thing that MPs really like are briefings on issues that are useful, especially if there's very specific information related to their constituency or their constituents. They also really like advice on bills if they're coming up and they happen to be on that committee. You can find a list of kind of upcoming bills here and where they're up to. The other thing you can do for them is say, we'll convene a group of people who for you on the issue that you care about or the issue that we're campaigning on, which might be really useful for a shadow cabinet member or someone who's sort of thinking about policy, because actually if you offer to convene, you then basically put them in a room with all the people they need to speak to about that issue. So you can offer them that. And you can also offer them sort of press and exposure. So it might be that you plan a visit, or you can put them in front of like a certain community group, or you can give them a good news story. That's a really important thing. And the biggest thing is when you're trying to like pursue an issue is you need to do the heavy lifting in terms of how this might help them win an election. So be really like careful to think about how your issue can help them win. Like, do you have polling that shows that this is a particularly important issue? Have you thought about the kind of messaging or the ways that you'll think about your issue? Have you been able to show how many people actually care about this issue? Like, this is the way that you can kind of present your issue in the most convincing way. So really thinking about these things before you enter a meeting is really important, because that will help you when you're doing that. Getting things into the manifesto just really, really quickly. I think, as Rahul said to me before this call started, the deadline's probably passed for this, largely. However, if you are seeking like policy change or a manifesto commitment, you just need a very well-written briefing with a clear ask, with a clear indication of the support, public support for the change, and messaging that could in some way be helpful in an election, or at least not unhelpful in an election. Another approach to this is if it's a very small change, you make it as technocratic as possible and you slip it in. And again, that's another way of approaching it. So you either go super technocratic and boring, so it just slips in, or you go, this is how it will help you like win, and this is why it's convincing or persuasive. The other thing as well is that some things might not be able to be in a manifesto, and that doesn't mean that you should like give up. It just means that you need to rethink and keep building relationships. And the relationships you build with like policy advisors are probably more important than necessarily getting a commitment in a manifesto, because parties have to be very, cognizant of things like spending commitments and things like that ahead of an election. So also relationship building longer term beyond a manifesto will be just as important as getting like that commitment in. So getting a meeting, you can start by writing an email. The biggest second advice, I mean, this email will basically be screened by a staff member. It won't be going direct to an MP. So always be like aware of that. And the biggest thing you can do after sending an email is always ring people up and chase up by telephone. This is the single most important thing. So you can find office numbers either online and just ring the office number that's there, or you can always ring the parliamentary switchboard, which is 0207 219 1000, and just ask to be put through to an office. And you just say, can you put me through to name of MP's office? And then you just get put through. And usually you will speak to a very stressed out diary secretary who will answer the phone, be like, who are you? And you'll be talking about following up on an invitation or a diary meeting. But it's worth kind of ringing again and pushing, because actually that's quite important, because it shows that you're really committed and interested in doing this. Biggest thing is be nice to staff members, always. They are the gatekeepers. They control whether you get that meeting or not, actually, and they have a huge amount of power. You can also look up the name of staff members using the parliamentary registers of research assistants that actually exist. It's publicly available information. So always worth trying to like understand who you might be talking to and saying hello. That's really important. And then also make multiple approaches. If the first stop doesn't work, you might not get through to the Secretary of State or Shadow Secretary of State first time around. Approach a junior minister and go that way around. But always try different routes. And I think Rahul said that, don't give up. And then also using the constituency angle is really important. Personal letters from constituencies will always get a response. Or they should do. So that's a good like beginning point. Just quickly, creating pressure through the constituency. If you need to lobby multiple MPs, often like having really clear data about how your issue is going in their constituency is really important. This constituency dashboard run by Parliament gives you really good stats on different issue areas. You might want to leverage that. Really important to map your support base by constituency. So you might want to say X number of your constituents have contacted you about this. You might want to get them to write to their MP, and you might also want to get them to tweet at the MP. That's a really, really important one, because MPs actually spend a lot of time on Twitter, too much time on Twitter. So a lot of people tweeting at them will probably get their attention. Yeah, the other thing that you might want to do is kind of, You can always, if you want to go hardball, which isn't always great, but you can do, you can say, you know, local news, MP has ignored X number of supporters around this issue. That might be something you want to do if you're kind of really playing hardball. There's also a really amazing tool done by Common Knowledge that they're launching soon, which is called Mapped, which allows you to map postcodes to different constituency boundaries. Incredibly helpful if you're trying to like map your support base. So if you're interested in that, they're launching that soon in April. We'll send around the date. And it would be really good to get more groups using that and more organizations using that. The other thing you can do is leverage political parties. So if you're trying to say reach Labour MPs, you might want to get involved in the party architecture. You might want to sort of do a template motion and start getting like local constituency parties to pass it. You know, this is definitely likely to get an MP's attention and worth exploring. Again, the Labour Party campaign for democracy, or the Labour Party campaign for PR was very effective in doing this, actually, leveraging kind of local party architecture. Or another thing that is really important is leveraging like local party blogs or party blogs. So for Labour, you've got Labour List. For Conservatives, you've got Conservative Home. For Liberal Democrats, you've got the Liberal Democrat Voice. But, you know, it's always good maybe putting a blog in that saying why every, you know, Labour MP should be supporting X and just make your case. Because usually that kind of thing gets read. It might not be read directly by the parliamentarian, but it would probably be read by the staff member. And that can be really, really powerful. So just really quickly before we move on to questions, here are some really useful tools, websites that will be helpful. Official business debates moments are all on Parliament TV. So if you want to do clipping, that's quite a good place to go. MP email address and telephone numbers are all here, or you can ring the switchboard on that number, and it's to be put through to a member's office. MP staff members, you can find all that here. This is an amazing site called Future Labour MPs that was built by the Movement Research Unit, which basically has information about all the Labour candidates standing for the election. So if you're interested in doing some like intel or kind of sense of who's standing and what the candidates are and what they care about, this is a really useful website that has been pulled together and crowdsourced information. Democracy Club also has candidate details, so you can literally look for candidates who stand in every election, and that's super useful. Again, we talked about Map by Common Knowledge. If you're interested in donations, we built a tool called conservativepartyfunding.co.uk, which allows you to look at which different industries are donating to the Conservative Party and potentially use that information productively. There's My Society, which again Rahul mentioned, which is really, really good and useful, and that covers easy ways to search like what your MP said. So you can go on there. Hansard, which is a record of all parliamentary contributions, has an API. So if you're interested in doing any tech stuff with that, it's very open and easy to use. And you can again use that to search. And then also I'd suggest that it's very useful using tools like ChatGPT or AI tools to summarize things, because that's something that you end up doing a lot of in public affairs. So, you know, don't be afraid of using that technology. And we do have a ChatGPT for campaigners session, which is on our website. So if you're interested in more depth on how to use ChatGPT well, how to prompt it, we can go into that too. And just finally, basically Guido Fawkes has a list of PADs which may be useful, as in people who are the parliamentary advisors for different offices. You might want to have a look at that. They also have SPADs for the government too, which is 2 open lists which are quite helpful. So the link to that is there. So yeah, that is everything. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.